I want to understand from you, how do you tell a founder's story and build a brand in our organization?
I always ask the people that I'm working with and the founders, what made you decide to do this?
You have to really understand the why.
Because ultimately, everything that comes after is a consequence of that first decision.
Why do you still think communications is so key and so important?
Most unique assets are your people. How you engage with your own people is the difference between failing and succeeding.
You're scaling at speed. Then how do you maintain that culture without slowing down progress?
Key thing is you hire slow and you fire fast.
Welcome to Doers Defined, where our mission is to amplify emerging market heroes bringing positive change. Today on Doers Defined, we're joined by a true global powerhouse in communications, leadership, and innovation, Susanne Elias-Stulemeijer, who also happens to be part of my chosen family in the UAE. And Susanne has led from the front at some of the world's most influential companies, from Uber in Europe, where she was the first EMEA Communications Lead, to Delivery Hero, and most recently as Vice President of Communications, Public Affairs, and Sustainability at Talabat. And while at Talabat, she built the team from the ground up, led major initiatives across the Middle East and North Africa, and helped steer the company through its historic IPO, the biggest global tech IPO of 2024. Susanne brings a rare global lens to everything that she does. She's not just a leader, she's a culture shaper and a fierce advocate for people-first leadership, and a proud mother of 3 incredible and very handsome boys. She embodies a balance between ambition and authenticity. And today we'll get into the real stuff: how to lead through change, build teams that thrive, communicate with clarity, and why being bold and human still matters. Susanne, welcome to Doers Defined, and I am so delighted that you're here.
I'm so humbled by all these words.
Yeah,
it's strange to hear someone say all that out loud.
Yeah, but very well deserving. So I always say we'll dive right in. I think the first is understanding your childhood. So you're of Dutch origin, but grew up in Algeria and India. So tell me, what are some of the fondest memories from when you were young?
So indeed, I was very little. I was only 8 months old when we moved to Algeria, and this was in the late 70s. Growing up there, it was a very different time, evidently. But I have a lot of great memories in the sense that it was a very free and carefree time, upbringing under the sun. And in India, equally, a very sunny environment, outdoors, exploring. My mom loved cultures and loved Rajasthan. So in India, we explored a lot of the palaces back in the day as a child. So those are my fondest memories, is really exploring the unknown. And the world was a very different place, right? I mean, the world is exciting today, but those are really my shaping memories of being very barefoot, barely any clothes, and exploring.
Yeah, it sounds like the perfect childhood. But why India and Algeria? Because those are very unique places to grow up.
I always say this. My dad is, people always ask me this question, like, was your dad a diplomat or did he work for Shell? Those are the two obvious,
exactly.
Being a Dutch person. He was an adventurous lawyer, and he chose a sort of that not so typical path, unconventional path, and took on some roles that got him to Algeria, and then after that to India.
Oh, wow. And so just with your career, I'm just wondering whether your childhood played a part in you deciding to follow into public affairs and storytelling? So yeah, what drew you to public affairs and storytelling?
I mean, obviously there is a very clear red line, I would say, a red thread, which is having lived abroad and then coming back. I remember coming back from India wearing colorful clothes and bracelets up to here and beads and, coming back very differently, dressed differently than my peers. But I was obviously very Dutch. My dad's Dutch, my mom's Dutch. And so all of a sudden I was different, even though I was officially part of the group, right? And I think that was always has led me to be interested in bringing cultures together, because I came from the same culture and still I felt different. And so also when I was as I got older, building bridges and connecting is really something that excites me and makes me happy when I see people coming together like, oh, I'm so happy the two of you finally met, right?
You're a connector.
I'm a connector, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Huh. And, I've always known you to be very intentional, very organized, and you always want to constantly improve and constantly learn. So let me ask you, what are you playing beginner at these days?
Well, being fit again.
I'll put up my hand.
Yeah, honestly, no.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had 3 children, and that in itself is, takes a lot from your physical well-being. And then aside from that, whilst I had my second, I was pregnant of my second when I joined Uber. I didn't know I was pregnant of my second when I joined Uber. So I literally did like 80-hour work weeks with a laptop on my big bump. And I think I took 2 or 3 months maternity leave. That's all. But after that, I always really made an effort to be fit. And then baby number 3 was born. I jumped into Talabat, and I did do kickboxing and some training, but I didn't really get back into my healthy routines. And so all of a sudden I realized, okay, I have no more excuses now. So I'm really trying. I'm suffering from a high intensity workout. Literally, if I walk up the stairs, I'm suffering. But so that's one thing definitely that I'm struggling with, is physically getting fit again.
Yeah, no, we share that. I mean, I have a 2-year-old, so yeah, it's hard. I think with building Doers Defined, I'm just learning how important storytelling is, how difficult sometimes it is. And I want to understand from you, how do you tell a founder's story and build a brand in our organization?
It's a good question. And I think you can't go to ChatGPT, right? I think telling a founder story is critical, right? And I think you can only tell a founder story when they reach a certain place, right? And that's different for every story and every founder story. Because telling the story as you go, you can only see the results and the outcomes and the consequences of certain decisions when they've happened, right? So I think I always ask the people that I'm working with and the founders, very often also CEOs, luckily, what made you decide to do this, right? What was it that made you decide, okay, I'm going to start this company, or right? And how then from there do we tell the story? Because ultimately everything that comes after, right, is a consequence of that first decision. So finding that, what was it? Like with Uber, Travis told this story many times. He was living in LA. He had been very successful already, but he was in Paris at Le Web. It was snowing. Getting a taxi in Paris is awful, especially during Christmas time. So him and his friend Gareth we're trying to get a taxi, impossible. And they were like, we have the same problem in LA with town cars. Why don't we build an app, right? And we just put on the drivers that we know and we think are good. And they built it just for them, for the fun of it. And then Travis always jokes saying, when people from kindergarten started messaging me about, hey, can you get the password that was needed to open the app? He's like, I knew I was onto something. So he didn't start it because he thought, I'm going to build this, crazy big empire. He started it because he wanted to solve a problem.
Well, that's
right.
Yeah, and I think it's important because a lot of times, in hindsight, you can only connect the dots looking back.
Yeah.
But I think also what I'm taking is that you have to really understand the why.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think from a communication standpoint, you're drawing out the why from
Yeah, of course.
Why
and
that was started.
The why, but also, what was it? Because, there's a lot of problems and there's a lot of solutions to every problem, right? But why did you decide at that moment to actually, at that time, to do that, right? Because it's the typical why, what, how, when, right? And in comms and telling a story, that's ultimately, you need to figure out at least 4 or 5 out of the 5 to get to that story, to make it really a proper story.
And, in organizations as you're leading them, why do you still think communications is so key and so important in every organization? And I want to hear your perspective.
I mean, I think, communications is the means to an end, right? Ultimately, it's all about people. And I always say this, but it's the people that make the organization and not the organization that makes the people, right? So if you're going through a change or something has happened internally or externally, your, most unique assets are your people, generally speaking. And so the communication, how you engage with them is critical. If you want to damage control or if you want to change direction and you need people to go in a different direction, right? And so the communication is not just the words itself, right? It's the planning, the timing, the sequence, right? I always say internal communications. I used to really think, that's, nice and cute, and it's just sending an email to people when I was junior. And then actually now I'm at a place where I think it's actually the most important part, because what you tell your people is what you should be telling the world. They should be hearing it first. If some big change is happening, if someone's leaving or if you're changing direction. And also nowadays, especially with social media and phones, an internal email is an external press release within no time, right? So for those different reasons, I think, how you engage with your own people is the difference between failing and succeeding.
And thank you for that perspective, because I think very often you just don't know how important, communications is within an organization. Now, you've led comms in companies that were mere startups and then went on to being massive organizations. And that's Uber, Talabat, which both went on to IPO. How and what did you see early on that made you believe in these companies? And then how did you know that it was the right move for you?
With Uber, I saw an ad for the job for policy lead, and I was based out of London, and I thought this really looks like something, very interesting, because I myself struggled a lot with, as a woman on my own, taking a taxi at night, traveling around. Very often I found it struggling. So I thought this is an interesting one. But no, Uber was tiny in Europe at the time. So it was, I guess, a gamble in the sense that I really felt they are solving a problem that I can relate to. And they're really at the start. And then I applied for the job of head of policy, so public policy engagement. And they said, no, we want someone like you because you have comms experience and policy experience to lead the comms. And I was like, okay. and we were very small at the time, right? So I had done comms and policy in Brussels and led it in my job in Switzerland as well. But Uber was very small at the time. And I was struggling to get, journalists interested in interviewing Travis because he was nobody. And they were, and Uber was small. So it was I didn't go for the glitzy name. I took that leap because I was very interested. And also the people that I met. There were two people that interviewed me. One is still there. He's now in the board. Fantastic gentleman called Pierre Dimitri, and an Italian lady. And both of them were super fierce and smart. And everyone that I spoke to had this same sparkle right? And I was like, these are people that I can learn from. They were younger than me, but I just saw they're solving a problem, super bright people. And then I think the same was true for Talabat. Actually, the CEO, Tommaso, he moved from Singapore to Dubai for this role. And he called me, we connected, and he said, let's have a lunch. And I thought we were just catching up. And he's like, come and work for me. And then I came to the office, and it was a tiny office as well. And, scruffy a bit. But everyone that I met, I was like, yes. So ultimately, I think, it's a sort of standard answer, but, the people totally was the reason that I took the leap. And people frowned when I said, oh, I'm joining Talabat, because they were like, what's this organization? It's like this old, local, and I thought, sounds perfect to me, right? So yeah, it's about choosing what suits you and excites you. And for me, that was very clearly in both cases something, I didn't care what other people thought.
Yeah, but I think also right place, right time, right? Because not everybody joins organizations that ultimately end up going to IPO, right?
True.
Or being the biggest or largest, like global tech IPO.
Yeah, but I think if that's right place, right time, but it's also, ultimately I think if you follow your gut, right, you will end up in the places that were meant to be. And that sounds, it's not intentional at all. In a way it is, and in a way it isn't, right? And I think, I also saw a lot of people in Uber who stayed 8 months or a year, and that was like, oh, well done, like it's dog years, right?
Yeah.
So it's a journey, and yeah.
And, and so I have to ask, listening to you and saying that at some point, you couldn't get an interview for Travis, and then knowing obviously what manifested after. What was the most challenging day in sort of public affairs and communications?
There were many. I can think of two. One was very early stage. It was actually also at Le Web, the infamous or famous one where Travis came up with the idea. And so he was speaking there, and I was staffing him. And it was my first time staffing him. He had come to London, but it was all, no interviews. It was all low key. And then Travis goes on stage, does well. And then a journalist asked him, like, do you, apart from Uber, have any other ventures? And he responds, no. He's like, Uber is like my wife. And unlike, I know in France here, it's very normal to have a mistress. But no, I don't have any mistresses. And I just looked and I thought, oh, my God. Right. And I was like, okay, all the journalists are now going to come to me. Like, did he really say that? But then, nothing really happened. And my comms spokesperson heart went, oh. So that was one. And I think the other one, which was a lot more challenging, was when one of the senior leaders at Uber made comments about a journalist that if he could, he would invest money and investigate and so on. And it came out on the day that we were launching making a new announcement in Paris. And I remember getting a call from San Francisco and my boss telling me, and I was like, really? Right? And obviously the global media was overshadowed with this news cycle. And we had lined up Wall Street Journal, FT, all the big, outlets on, this new announcement. But, then this happened. Right. And I will not repeat what I said then, there was some swearing involved. But you just deal with it and you get on. And damage control, obviously, after that. But it was a tough time because key stakeholders for a comms person are the journalists, right? And then you have to go and explain, this is what someone said,
But it must make for some very exciting days. Difficult, I think, in hindsight, looking back. But probably, those are tough situations to navigate.
Yeah, and to be fair to the person in question, I mean, we all make mistakes, right? But if you're high up in the tree, the stakes are high. And I think that sometimes, especially in a scale up, the implications and the consequences of your actions or your words, are not as well thought through as in a more corporate, settled environment, right?
Yeah. And so Talabat went on to go through incredible growth. And again, we keep saying this historic IPO, the largest, global tech IPO of 2024. What was the most pivotal internal decision that you think fueled that success?
I mean, I thought about this, about the journey, because it was after more or less 5 years after I joined. And what were the key milestones? I think one of the key decisions that Tommaso took, and some of my colleagues in the leadership team, was to move from a market-based operations model to creating our own Talabat fleet. What does it mean? Before, restaurants had like 10, 15, maybe 50 riders on a bike with their own branding, and they would go onto a pool on a platform and they would deliver their food, but also other restaurants' food, right? And very few Talabat. And then we moved to the operating model where all the bikes were branded, and with our fleet partners, we had a mix of the two, or a mix of all the fleet partners, but they were all orange, all branded. So all of a sudden, Talabat became visible everywhere. So that was one thing. And the other thing it did was the customer experience was a lot better, right? Because all of a sudden you control all the processes and so on. So all of a sudden it was, for the customer experience, it was also a huge improvement. So I think that really helped scale and bring visibility. That wasn't there before.
And so I think this is a question that perhaps any founder, entrepreneur who's growing an organization thinks to themselves, you're scaling at speed, then how do you maintain that culture without slowing down progress?
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't think there's one silver bullet kind of, right? There's not one right answer. I do think, though, especially in teams, as leader of a team, whether it's small or big, key thing is you hire slow and you fire fast. And what do I mean with that? I think, you need to take your time when you hire and bring on new people, because they really need to fit in the team and in the culture that you've built. But either if the hire doesn't work, hopefully not. If you've taken your time, then it shouldn't be. But if there's changes to, if the company evolves and the person doesn't really evolve in the same direction, which is very normal, right? Then you also have to be honest and let go, right? And that's a difficult decision. But it's an important one. I do think, hiring slow and firing fast is very difficult, right?
It's
to
hard.
do as a leader.
It's hard.
Because you
You
build a
invested.
relationship. You invested.
Yeah.
You chose someone. You feel responsible for their success. And if they're not evolving in the way that you were hoping that they would, but very often I find it's not so much that the person is just not qualified anymore. It's just how you evolve, right? I think we all do evolve. And sometimes if you're lucky, then you're evolving in the same direction as the organization that you're in. But then sometimes you realize that you don't belong there anymore. And then it's a very natural decision to, move out. And very often you do see that people who leave and find something else, they all of a sudden are thriving, right? And people are like, oh, what happened? It's like, I'm actually super happy where I am now.
Yeah. So sometimes it is a win.
It is a win. And it's also a matter of doing it gracefully, right? And leaving gracefully, but also letting people go in a graceful way, because it is hard as it is. But if you do that with intent and care, people will notice it.
Yeah, so retain dignity.
Yes.
For the individual.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, obviously leading communications for Uber in Europe and then Talabat in the UAE, those are two very different regions. So how do you think your leadership has changed having worked in Europe and then leading an organization in the Middle East?
I think there's two, obviously it has evolved and changed, but I think there's two elements to it. One is geographically, obviously, if you look at Europe and MENA, and the second is also Europe. I was a lot younger, single, then married, and then had children, right? And now as a mother of three, I think also it does impact you and how you lead. So from a geographical perspective, Europe is very much about process and planning and formality, right? So that really helped build foundations for strategy and planning and structure. Like, especially in Brussels, where I was based for many years, you don't just call up someone and have a meeting. There's a whole process, and you prepare, and you have briefing notes, and right? And whether that's a politician or a government official or whether it's a journalist, you come prepared. And if you don't, then you'll have to accept the consequences. Now, when you go to the Middle East, still very true. However, it's, it's much more people-centric and fluid and dynamic, which I find very exciting, in the sense that things change constantly. So if you think you're going to, be successful by planning everything carefully, it's going to be very hard here. You have to be able to deal with constant change because things happen, schedules change, right? It's quite a dynamic region in both positive and more negative, challenging ways, right? With conflicts around and so on. So, but there's so much opportunity and you have to be ready to jump into that, right? And then, so I think my leadership style has evolved, in that way that you're much more, I think with working in scale-ups, being agile is quite important, but you become even more like flexible and thinking in ways of how can we make it happen together. That's one. And I also think as a parent, you become more patient.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
With people and, and you also understand that people come to work with their whole selves, right? And this is something, and it doesn't matter whether you are, cleaning the toilets or sitting in a fancy corner office. Everyone comes up and shows up with their own bag, right? With their own baggage. And so, leading with that sort of compassion and empathy, I think is very important. And I was also, I think, lucky, especially in Talabat, that we had some colleagues who were very empathic and, caring. So we created this environment where people did feel very cared for and safe, and they would show up. Right?
Well, that's beautiful. Yeah. People first. And you've been a huge advocate for that through and through.
Well, I was also given the space to do that, right? Because it's not always obvious. Yeah.
Yeah. And then just looking ahead, how do you think AI and big tech will change the world of communications?
Yeah, I mean, I think it will change drastically everything. And at the same time, I'm very excited about it. And it changes nothing in a way. What do I mean with that? I think it changes everything in the sense that you can ask anyone in my team, I always say we're not a fax machine, as in we're not going to spit out press releases or fax machine printer, right? We don't just create content. That's not what comms and public affairs is about. And so now you can replace fax machine printer for ChatGPT. I think it's going to be it is already a game changer in terms of content creation, but it does get you to, I would say, 70 or 80%. It doesn't get you to 100, right? Because ultimately, it's about people, right? And no matter how, I think you can achieve 90% probably in 6 months. We can get to 90%, but you will always have that human element, right? And that's one thing, and also the quality. I think today I can see any text 99.9% of the time I can see this is AI, ChatGPT. I'm sure soon I will not be able to see it.
What do you see? I'm actually curious.
Patterns, choices of words. Yeah. And of course, you can prompt it properly to make it really sound like you. But again, I think the comms and PA profession is very much a people profession. So do you still need armies of people? I think, a good comms leader and a team doesn't have an army of people, right? By default, because you don't need an army of people. You need good people. And then you can get support if you have unexpected volume that you need to create, big transformations or stuff like that. But other than that, you should have quality people, right? And not just senior quality people. You can do and get by with a small team as long as you, train them and educate them and let them grow and involve them in complex issues. From an early career point of view, because that's when you get the added value. If you just tell someone, can you please draft X, Y, Z, but you don't give them context. If you would ask me, I will give you an average document, right?
Yeah.
Without context. So I think that's, with AI, it's, you need to give a lot of context to get to that level that I think is, where you want to be.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that perspective as well. And of course, people are going to ask you, now that you've left Talabat after the IPO, what's next?
I mean, I think that this is obvious, the most asked question. And I'm still very much out of my comfort zone. Because I need to train myself to gracefully say, I don't know, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm having lots of conversation, and I think there's so much potential and ambition in this region, and projects and businesses that I've seen that excite me, and talent. So it's not a matter of, I don't know because there's nothing. It's actually the opposite. There's so many things that I think are incredible and that are just, they're just getting started. And there's also this momentum in this region, right? And especially in Dubai and in the UAE, that anything is possible. And I think, I'm super grateful that we've lived here for 8 years, and I never thought I would live here for 8 years to begin with. And I also really feel, and my husband and I both feel this very strongly, we want to give back to this country that has given us so much, right? Our kids love it, we love it, and we see the potential, and there's willingness, and it has all the ingredients, right, to grow. And so I just have to force myself to be in that uncomfortable place where I say, I don't know. And I'm just being Susie, the one who used to work at Talabat at Uber. This is what I hated when I left Uber, and now it's the same with Talabat. I have to, right? It's like, it's someone I used to be.
Yeah.
And who am I now? And I've always been Susie, right?
Yeah.
But it's not, it's as if your professional life equals who you are 100%, which is obviously absolutely not the case. So fit Susie, hopefully soon.
Fit Susie, fit Elsie.
Exactly.
No, it's such a beautiful answer. And I think I say that because you've been a huge advocate, for the region, for the Middle East, North Africa, and kind of shared that passion with me, even when I wasn't necessarily sure. I think I'm still warming up, I think, a little bit more. But I think when you speak to the opportunities in the region, maybe tell me a little bit more about what you see from your experience, especially within the startup world.
I mean, as I said, when I worked at Talabat, I came across so many talented young people from all over the region. Some of them have left, and some of them are still in Talabat. And through the ones that have left, who started their own things or joined other startups, I see this excitement and also this pride of, there's so much coming out of this region and we're just getting started. And I think the IPO, it still gives me goosebumps when I talk about it. But I think what made me the proudest of being part of that journey was that sense that I really felt amongst colleagues and people outside who said, this is such an important IPO for all of us because it shows, right, the potential of this region. And it will open up so many opportunities for all these startups that are in this space here, and not just in this country, in the region, right? So very humbling, but also exciting. I feel like it's a new chapter that we're seeing in this region, and right. And there's so much in fintech, in climate tech, right? There's so many. I think those areas I see. And I hear a lot of climate tech, mainly obviously because it's also from a personal interest, but fintech, blockchain, there's so many things happening. And then the fact that we have a minister of AI in this country, right?
Yep.
Young, dynamic.
Actually AI week, right?
Exactly.
As we're filming this.
Exactly. So there's so many things happening. I always ask myself, like, how is it possible they come up, there's even more. And every time it's, surprises us all.
Yeah, no, incredibly exciting. And I'm glad that you're here so that I can share this journey and all these learnings with you as well. Now, you're a mom of 3 boys, right? And I have 1, and I can tell you what a juggle. So I want to understand, how does Susie define balance in this stage of life?
I think balance is a very misleading word.
Okay, tell me more.
It doesn't exist in my life.
Yeah.
I think the thing is, before becoming a parent, there are 3 dimensions. One is your social life, your professional life, and then you as an individual, right? And you have to figure a way that all these 3 get a bit of attention, right? And then you have to decide, a minimum threshold for each in terms of what is important to you as a person, right? If you want to have a career and grow fast and you're ambitious, then you probably have to sacrifice a bit the social part and the me part, right? And then focus on the professional part. When you become a parent, there's this 4th dimension, I call it, and you have to define the threshold for that, right? And it's the 100% story, right? If you focus 50% on one, then you have 50 left for the other 3. So it is a matter of prioritizations and sacrifice, right? And you have to decide for yourself what works for you. So, I always say you can have it all, also as a woman, but you probably won't have it all at the same time.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in that.
Right?
Yeah.
It's just,
Yeah. Yeah. No, well said. No, but I think it's also beautiful to see somebody who, because you're actually doing it. I think the words that you were told me, you just said you have to be super organized.
Yeah.
That was like the one takeaway every time we've had a conversation. Just be super organized.
I hate Excel sheets, but I also at the same time will admit that my life would be a complete disaster without them.
Yeah. So how do you keep learning? So are you an avid reader? Are you, do you listen to podcasts?
I wish I could say yes, but I read so much at work, right? And I love newspapers. It's my regretful thing, but I have a paper newspaper at home. I still get it. And even there, I sometimes struggle to read it every day. But I love my weekend newspaper, and I love the newspapers. I do. Do I read a lot? No, I think being organized and finding my own way is not necessarily through reading. No.
So what is it? Where does it come from?
I mean, it's not by choice, right? Conversations, talking to people, right? Learning from how do you do it? Right? Conversations with other people.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. And here, there's an inflow of people in, out. There's an event almost all the time.
Yeah.
So you can really be up to date on a lot of
Yes.
what's happening, a lot of the innovation.
Yeah.
There's a lot of interesting people in the region.
Yes. But obviously, as I said, newspapers, reading the actual news and listening to podcasts as well when I'm in the car. But when my kids are in the car, right, I have to prioritize.
Yeah.
And then it's
Yeah, they take over.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a closing tradition on the podcast, and I always ask, how can this community that we're building serve you in this season?
What do you mean with that?
So how can we support where you are right now and where you want to get to? And right now you're in a meaningful transition, in a pause, redefining
fit.
Susie for
Don't
the next.
give me food. No.
Yeah.
As I said, I think for me, being in a community with like-minded people and having conversations and not introducing me as the person who used to be at Uber or Talabat. No, I think hit me up with, interesting projects or initiatives. As I said, I really am in a place where I want to contribute and also help other people. If I would see my 25-year-old self, I would tell her, go and approach that person, whoever it is that you admire, and ask for advice or someone who can support or they can recommend, right? So I'm in that space where I have a bit of time and the luxury of also giving back. So that is definitely also something that I'm very much looking into.
Who do you look up to?
All my friends who are moms and dads, right? I think the hardest thing is just being true to yourself, right? And I look up to people who are unapologetically themselves, right? And it's not always easy to just be yourself.
Well said. Susanne, thank you so much for being on Doers Defined. Just so many nuggets that I have to pause and sort of, obviously listen to this after. But I am so grateful that you were here just to share your incredible story. And so blessed just to have you in my life, both professionally and as a friend and fellow mom as well.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.